It's a pretty elite group up there, and he has the skill set to get that done, and I think he has the smarts to get that done. But ultimately, the execution needs to be there, and what we saw last year in a 100-point season needs to be the bar. Like that, just you can't waver down to an 89-point season if you're going to be a top 5 player in the NHL. You don't see that wavering from the other names that you just mentioned. So I'll say I believe it when I see it. That sounds way harsher than it is meant to sound. It's just we're talking a top 5 player. We're not saying is he going to be a star player in this league. The answer to that is an overwhelming yes. But if you're going to raise that bar to the elite handful in the National Hockey League, then the answer is no.
So it's a very narrow pathway. Would be regardless, but is particularly so given the age of the top of the heap right now, the cream of the cream. I mean, McDavid is 27 years old. Austin Matthews is 26 years old. Cale Makar is 25 years old. Draisaitl and McKinnon are 28 years old. I mean, only Kucherov is north of 30 from that group of 6, and you can arrange them as you see fit. It's also a narrow pathway because we know Elias Pettersson is not going to play 2 types of games, which are prevalent amongst that group of players we just talked about. He doesn't have the speed game of a Connor McDavid, right? I don't think he's ever going to have the speed game of a Connor McDavid. And he doesn't have the brute force and power game. He just doesn't have the physique to be able to play more Leon Draisaitl, Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon style hockey. So when you remove those 2 elements, and let's face it, top players in the world in any sport typically have one or both of those elements. It's got to be a cerebral game. It's got to be Elias being an elite goal scorer, being a 40-goal scorer, and it's got to be Elias Pettersson being a top setup man, right? Like doing things, if not to the level of Henrik Sedin, close to that, being one of the top playmakers, creators in the game, as well as scoring his fair share of goals. Now, the one thing Elias does have, perhaps over some of those other contenders, is the defensive game. Who can forget that back check in his NHL debut? I will never let you live down.
Never.
But this is the possibility to be a complete, I know our friend Mr. Ferraro hates the term, but a 200-foot player, right? Par excellence, a guy who is not only an elite offensive player, but one of the best defensive forwards and center icemen out there. If he can achieve all that, yeah, I can see a day where you put him in the top 5 league players. Of course, the other thing we have to consider here, Blake, is the young guys who are up and coming. Like, how long before a Connor Bedard breaks in?
Macklin Celebrini.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're not only looking at the people in front of you now and saying, wow, that's a really high bar. A lot's going to have to happen for him to get in that group, but also the push from below. Who's coming and how quickly are they coming into NHL superstardom?
Yeah, there's a lot of young talent. It really is a golden age. Be thankful that we have arrived here based on where we were 20 years ago in this league, where we were wondering, if a team would get to 3 goals on any given night. We're not there right now, thankfully, and there's just a lot of talent coming through, which is going to raise the bar of expectation for a player like an Elias Pettersson. So he's got to keep pushing. And you're right. If he gets to Patrice Bergeron levels of defensive awareness and accountability, that's another path to the top 5. But and I'm just going to have to see that before I believe.
Yeah, I'm not sure it has to be to the extent of Bergeron. I mean, let's face it, he owned the Selke. He occasionally lent it out to others, but, to a Kopitar level, say.
Yeah.
Where you're not the premier dominant defensive forward in the league, but you're right there every year in terms of a finalist for the Selke Trophy. Anyways, we'll talk to J-Pat about Petey here in a few moments. And I know we used it last year and it became a punchline and a cliche, but big summer for Petey here with the Canucks having dispatched their strength coach over to Sweden to work with him, with Tocchet challenging him, saying he wants him to be one of the top 3 conditioned players when he gets back here, of course, overcoming the playoff disappointment, of course, living up to the new rich contract that he has. But top 5 players, like right now, he's the 3rd best player on his team. So, you're going to have to be, because Quinn Hughes is one of the other guys who's coming right into that top 5 player group in the National Hockey League.
One thing that people haven't talked about a whole lot is, preseason is shorter now. Training camp is shorter.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we're going to start to see, and this didn't come true last year, but it'll be interesting to see this year. Are teams that just have more offensive prowess going to be able to get off to faster starts as there's less prep time, less coaching of X's and O's? The teams with the God-given offensive talent, we always talk about the beauty of October and November hockey because it's sloppy, because the coaching is slow to take. Well, it's going to be even more so because there's less coaching available to them now with the shorter preseason and training camps. Do you owe it to yourself to let your offensive players run hog wild, score a bunch of goals, and get off to that good start? Give yourself the luxury of that good start to the NHL season.
I want to answer yes, partner, but then I think back to the Oilers start last season.
No, I know. That's the one caveat. Yeah, it didn't make any sense.
You're right. Typically before these defensive systems take hold, and of course, in a lot of spots, you'll be talking about a new coach, right, who is only meeting the players in training camp and doesn't have, as you mentioned, the requisite time to be able to instill and root that system. In a lot of cases, you're also talking about defense pairs finding chemistry, offensive forward lines finding chemistry, communication issues, and all of that. So, no, you're right. Love October hockey because typically we do see it a little more freewheeling and we see more goals going in. Sometimes the goaltenders too. They're, timing and all of that for facing real live NHL regular season shots versus what we see in preseason.
And you're healthy with the shorter preseason.
Typically,
less likely to be injured, right?
More often than not, you are healthy, unless you're a Stanley Cup contender and you're sitting a star on LTIR. Rick Tocchet is named one of the assistant coaches for Canada at the Four Nations Face-Off, which is going to take place this February in Boston and Montreal. Canada, the U.S., Sweden, and Finland. This is replacing the NHL All-Star Game. This is these hand-picked teams from Hockey Canada and the governing federations who are going to face off as a preamble to Olympic participation in 2026 in Milano Cortina, Italy. And look, it's a nice feather in the cap for Rick Tocchet. I would like to think that these coaching staffs are merit-based. And if that's the case, then Rick Tocchet absolutely deserves a position on John Cooper's bench. The lawyer from Prince George, of course, has presided over some exceptional teams in the NHL, and I think is a deserving head coach for Canada, and particularly so because he's a dual citizen and could coach the USA. Blake and I had a conversation with him about that once upon a time. I do know there are Hockey Canada guys, and Hockey Canada continues to be an old boys network, and of course, Tocchet has been a part of that going back to his playing days for Canada, where he participated for the Maple with the Maple Leaf. With the Maple Leaf on his chest. So look, nice honor for him. And if Canada does well, you would think that that's the coaching staff going to the Olympics in a couple of years.
You generally have to serve your apprenticeship, whether it's as a Team Canada executive or a coach, and then they make decisions from there. I would think that a competitive Vancouver Canucks squad is a part of that prerequisite for Olympic participation. Like even if he does really well at the Four Nations Cup, maybe the team does well, but the Canucks don't make the playoffs next year, I think that hurts his candidacy a little bit. So I think Canucks performance is actually tied into any Olympic posting for Rick Tocchet. But hey, it doesn't hurt. And unlike a player who I wince a little bit and think, it's a chance to get injured playing in an absolutely mean nothing tournament. The coach, I don't mind Rick Tocchet getting a little bit tired by having to think about new strategies for Team Canada. So It'll probably, if anything, when you get into a room with a bunch of the other top coaches in the league, you might get some ideas that you hadn't thought of that you can apply to your club level.
So here's the story. It's Saturday after the draft in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the Brock Besser draft for the Vancouver Canucks. Blake and I are lounging poolside at our hotel, 2015. And who walks up and pops a squat beside us is John Cooper.
There was nobody else in the pool. We were literally the only other people to talk to. Yeah.
And as you know, like the lawyer from Prince George, he likes to talk. He's a people person. So he pulls up beside us on a lounger. You guys mind? No, not at all. And start talking to him and, mention, we do radio in BC. And so that gets the conversation going more and more. And then at one point, after a couple of cocktails, Blake, if I'm not mistaken, he says to us, because for those who don't know the John Cooper story, moved to the United States, became a practicing attorney there in Michigan, a judge in one of the cases, a public defender, a judge in one of the cases that came before him, said, hey, my son, was playing hockey. Would you like to help out? I know you're Canadian, have a background in the game. Said, sure, I'll help out. And the next thing you know, he launched a hockey career. So we're sitting there talking about the upcoming, and help me with the title, Blake. What was the tournament we played with a patchwork European team and the Young Stars outfit? Whatever the NHL was going to deliver to us that preseason that wasn't the Olympics. And so Cooper says, I say to Cooper, so what do you think? Would you prefer to coach Canada or would you prefer to coach the U.S.? And he threw the question back at us and said, well, what do you guys think? Who would you prefer to coach? And I said, well, John, if Hockey Canada asks and you say no, you'll never be asked again. He went, good point. And then we said, hey, no, you should go and try and coach the Young Stars team because then you'll get a familiarity with them. And then when they turn 27 and become free agents, then they're going to maybe look at you and say, I want to play for Coach Coop again. So we had
North America. Yes. I believe that was a World Cup. I believe it was a World Cup.
They call it a World Cup?
I believe so.
Oh my God, whatever they called it, it did not resonate. So anyways, we had great fun with Coach Cooper that day, musing about his one-day coaching international hockey, because at the time he was a pretty young coach, right? And a surprising choice to take over for Guy Boucher with the Tampa Bay Lightning when Steve Yzerman adorned him as their next bench boss. And hey, nice work, nice pick by Yzerman. He has done exceedingly well. One of the top coaches in the game. Of that, there is no doubt. Let's get to our top story. It's brought to you by Yellow Dog Brewing, Neighborhood Brewing, Yellow Dog Spirits, and Foolish Winery. Men's basketball. They beat Spain 88-85. They finished the preliminary round 3-0. They win their group. And now we await a quarterfinal opponent for Canada after more sublime work from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and his supporting cast. This is becoming a big story, partner, and we are inching closer to the game that everybody on this side of the world wants to see. Canada and USA for a gold medal in men's basketball.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried. Canada doesn't like to make life easy on itself in this tournament right now, and they're 3-0, so there's not a lot to criticize there. But it's not like they're stomping opponents. They're going to have to dot every I and cross every T before we get to the dream showdown for gold against the Americans. And you want to stay on the right side of the quarterfinal bracket of the Americans as well, which is to say the opposite side of the bracket. So you face them in the gold medal game only. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how they do, who they get in the quarterfinals, and if there's another level that they can get to where they say, okay, now it's win or go home.
Yeah.
And are they able to execute at the higher plane than the rest of the organized the rest of the competition?
And when Blake says he's nervous, there's good reason here. The first game of the tournament against Greece, It was a 10-point lead at halftime, and yet Greece gave them some very nervous moments down the stretch.
It got to at least 16 points, if not 20.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Against Spain today, it was a dominant second quarter from the Canadians. Outscore the Spaniards by 11. That's the lead going into halftime. And then once again, some nervous moments. Spain down 2 with possession of the ball down the stretch. Against Australia, that was maybe the best win yet. That was Canada down 4 at the half and coming back in the second half and really showing the Australians who's boss. Wind up winning that game by 10, outscore the Aussies by 8 in the fourth quarter, by 6 in the third quarter to forge what was their easiest victory, or at least their most stress-free victory to date. Now, here are the stakes, because the men's basketball tournament is not finished today. There is more games tomorrow. And Eric Corrine, a fantastic basketball writer out of Toronto, has done the math here. And he writes, for true sickos, assuming the United States beats Puerto Rico, and look, I know Puerto Rico beat them in Athens, but I think, that was a different Puerto Rico.
Good bet.
Yeah. U.S. is going to beat Puerto Rico. Canada would need France to beat Germany by 3 points or fewer to finish second. Of course, if France loses to Germany, Canada would also finish second. And this would be behind the U.S., who would have the number 1 seed in the quarterfinals. If France beats Germany by exactly 4 points, they would need to score 96 or more in the game to overcome tiebreaker deficits to Canada.
That's the second tiebreaker. Yeah.
If France scores 95 points, they're tied in differential. They're tied in points, believe it or not. Canada would win the tiebreaker on FIBA World Ranking, believe it or not, and finish second. So
I'm not going to sweat that. They're not scoring 95 points. I don't think France is scoring 95 points.
So you're rooting for Germany to beat France, which would give Canada its entry as the second overall seed. And, of course, that would avoid the United States until the final, as you have talked about. But if France is able to beat Germany by more than 4 points, then there is still a pathway for the French to get the second overall seed in the quarterfinals.
Well, and as you pointed out as well off the air to us, is the top 2 seeds, not only do you get a theoretical better opponent in the quarterfinals, you actually get a third place team in the quarterfinals, the first 2 seeds. So and really Canada's group is probably the biggest group of death. Generally, there is a more substantial drop off from the second to the third place team in any given pool.
Yeah.
So,
like Luol Deng, the former NBA, has done incredible work with that South Sudanese basketball outfit. But, that's the sort of level of team infinitely beatable, put it that way. Yeah. Third place teams for this Canadian group with all the NBA talent in their midst. Whereas if you start, moving up the ladder, Germany won the FIBA World Cup last year, right? So you start moving up the ladder into teams of that order, of that capacity. It's a little bit more difficult. And frankly, Blake, I would want no part of France just because of Wembanyama and the way he can affect a game defensively. We're talking about a guy who could block 3-point shots, right? From his station down closer to the goal. He is so tall and so long. Tell us about our friends at Yellow Dog. What are they up to?
Well, there's lots of exciting things at Yellow Dog, including the release on July 30th, dropping the 10th anniversary Foxy Summer Sour Cherry Hefeweizen in collaboration with the friends at the world famous Sea Fox and the Jeff O'Neill Show. So dipping into our old history with radio here. Loaded with sour cherry and a hint of spice. It's a brew that will add a little zest to your day on the lake. Proceeds of this beer going to the friends at BC SPCA. That's the 10th anniversary Foxy Summer Sour Cherry Hefeweizen.
Mm-hmm. The BC Lions absolutely humiliated in Winnipeg by the Blue Bombers, 25-0. It's a second consecutive loss for BC, now 5-3. They lost that game to Calgary at McMahon prior to the bye week. Winnipeg was coming off a short week, Blake. And I know Willie Jefferson, Adam Bighill, they circled Lucky Whitehead in, the former Lion. In fact, two ex-Lions figured prominently for Winnipeg in this victory. Sergio Castillo, 6 for 6 with a 60-yard field goal, and Lucky with a touchdown catch. But coming off the short week for Winnipeg, Coach Campbell had challenged his players going into the bye, like, look, suck on that loss, let it motivate you, and come back better. And they were anything but. And perhaps the worst news here is not only you lose the battle, but you lose a key general as well. Vernon Adams, the quarterback, for the moment, they're calling it a knee injury that's going to be measured in weeks. He is still going through more testing. The worry here is that it could be months or it could be season ending. But right now, he'll be missing for weeks, which means Jake Dolegala next week in Edmonton against the Elks. And of course, couple of weeks, they're right back here at BC Place against those same Winnipeg Blue Bombers. You don't see a lot of shutouts in the CFL to begin with. The Lions were shut out last by Winnipeg back in 2021. It's quite embarrassing not to score a point in the Canadian Football League with all the different means available to you. But this was just an unwatchable, putrid performance by the BC Lions offense, so much so that the time of possession in this game is just about as lopsided as you'll ever see. Winnipeg holds the ball for 42 minutes to BC's 18.
Well, the 2-and-outs, when Adams is in the game to start the game, were just unbelievable. This is about as shocking a result as you could find. Winnipeg beating BC, I could have seen that coming.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's not crazy to suggest that would have happened. To win by 25 points, okay, bad day at the office. But to come away with the donut, with the bagel, no, that was not on the bingo card. Did not see that coming. And considering what the strengths are of this BC Lions team, no, absolutely not. This is the most spectacular offensive team in the league.
Stunning. I mean, they were scoring at will a few games ago. I mean, they looked damn near unstoppable a few games.
Multiple 200-yard games for receivers this year.
Like Hollins ran wild against Winnipeg last time. McInnes was the CFL Offensive Player of the Month. But perhaps that's it. Glenn Suter noted on the telecast. They moved Justin McInnes from the from the position he was holding down in the formation to make room for Keon Hatcher to play that spot on the short side at slot back. Why would you do something like that when it's working so well? Like, as good a player as Keon Hatcher is, you were getting such great play out of McInnes. I know not the Calgary game, but the previous games to that were sensational. Why would you screw with that? Anyways, I mean, Hatcher comes back into the lineup and you're the better for it. He's a good receiver coming off the Achilles injury, but you moved McInnes to accommodate him. You also had some ratio changes that were required to play an additional American receiver. Did that on the offensive line, starting the Canadian guard, Tyler Packer. Michael Couture back at center. So maybe it was just that was part and parcel of it. Couture first came back after missing time. Hatcher first came back after missing time. But after 3 quarters, folks, I mean, this is just, it's embarrassing. They had 63 net yards after 45 minutes of play. They were 1 of 11 on second down conversions. They had 2 first downs in the game. Now, they'd go on to crack 100 yards and double their first down production to 4, so 1 first down per quarter. But that's not getting it done. We got Rick Campbell on the show today, and there'll be a little bit of back to the drawing board on the offensive side of things here. And, of course, a lot of finger crossing with Vernon Adams because, have hopes for Dolegala, but I just think it's unrealistic to expect that he's going to be able to have the success, run the team as Adams did earlier this season. So it could be a very different BC Lions team that has to rely a little bit more on its defense and its special teams to win games here in VA's absence.
Yeah, it's a lot to ask, but this team is more than just Vernon Adams, and I look at William Stanback and just say, you know what, you went through the rigmarole of getting him, use him and throw some wrinkles in the offensive plan, and maybe you look a little bit different over the next few weeks while Vernon Adams is out. But to me, that's that's okay.
Well, look, a few things contextually here. We talked about it Wednesday. Winnipeg was the more desperate team here, right?
Yeah, sure.
Winnipeg was off to the horrific start for them. Winnipeg was the team that needed this game far more than the BC Lions. For BC, it was about, okay, can you stay in first place ahead of Saskatchewan with a victory? For Winnipeg, it was about, okay, let's not lose touch with the rest of the playoff pack here. I mean, Winnipeg was staring down the barrel of 2-7 if they had lost this football game, which would have been 3 more losses than Calgary at 3-4 in the CFL West. The other thing, BC against Winnipeg last year after losing the West Final beats them in the first 2 games. Then the chips are down in that late season game, right, Blake, here?
Mm-hmm.
And Winnipeg makes all the plays to win the game. Same happens in the West Final. The Lions are game. They are, put forth a good effort, but just aren't able to get it done. So, Mount Winnipeg is still there. They still have to get over the team that has been their nemesis, that has stood in the way of the BC Lions getting back to a Grey Cup. And they haven't been there since 2011. And you also got to give them some credit. Like, we know Adam Bighill, but, this applies for Willie Jefferson. They're fantastic rush in. Zach Collaros, who had a struggle this year at quarterback, but Brady Oliveira even. They have smart veteran football players who not only make others better with their talents, but make teams better and make units better with their attitude, with their leadership, with their intensity, and everything they bring to the fold. So, yeah, tip your cap to Winnipeg and the Blue Bombers last night for the way they played. But, it's a game that's winnable at halftime. And particularly since your defense is doing a pretty good job holding them to field goals and not touchdowns. There's 1 touchdown in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And yet BC's offense can't pull its own weight and find a way to score any points, let alone 1 touchdown.
Next game is going to be a big one. Got all sorts of prep time. It's almost like a second bye week now with the long week. Outside of the injury to Vernon Adams, you got time to lick your wounds and be better. It's going to be fascinating to see what they serve up next.
Yeah. How about Felix Auger-Aliassime at the Paris Olympics? Partners with Ottawa's Gabby Dabrowski, who is a tremendous doubles player on the WTA tour. If you're not familiar with her work, they win a bronze medal today in mixed doubles. And Felix also, he's game against Carlos Alcaraz, the best player in the world. I know Alcaraz isn't the number 1 seed here, but I think he has jumped Novak in terms of the guy you most want to avoid on tour. Loses that match, but he'll play for a bronze medal in men's singles. And Blake, this is the first tennis medal for Canada since 2020. And of course, Nestor Leroux, the famous gold one in Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
It is only the second tennis medal for Canada ever at the Olympics. So Felix Auger-Aliassime, if he is able to win this bronze medal match, and he'd face either Novak or Lucetti, right? The Italian.
It's over. It's Musetti.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sorry, like he'll face Musetti. Djokovic won. So Musetti is the opponent in the Italian 11th seed, I believe, in the tournament. So if he's able to win that, Blake, he'll have 2 of the 3 Canadian tennis medals of all time. Mm-hmm.
So tremendous games happening for Felix Auger-Aliassime as he
and if you're not a swimmer or Gosh, there's just not a lot of opportunities to be a multi-medalist.
Right.
Like not many sports offer that. Swimming's really the best one to come away as a multi-medalist, maybe
Yep.
track to some degree. But, it's right there for Felix Auger-Aliassime. And against Musetti, I mean, it's not a tap-in, but he is going to be, I think, the favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And he could come away as a multi-medalist here at these Olympics. It's amazing.
Yeah. And look, Canada's doing pretty well here at the Olympics. Yeah. Kylie Mass just added a bronze medal. So terrific for her. We got the bronze medal in mixed doubles, as mentioned. And then Blake. And this was not a medal a lot of people, or an athlete that a lot of Canadian Olympic observers were talking about. She was on the outside looking in, I think, in terms of contenders. But we now have a dynasty, buddy, in trampoline. And I will resist calling it what I called it after London 2012.
That's probably best.
For fear of Karen Larson and another admonishment. But Sophie-Anne Métat of Quebec is the bronze medalist in trampoline. We have 8 trampoline medals, Blake, since this became an Olympic event in 2012. We just own trampoline. Rosie McLennan, trailblazer, pioneer on trampoline.
It's amazing. I mean, if we're going to compete and be near the top of these medal standings on the regular, we need to win some of these newer events.
As you know, we typically do well with newer events, right? Yeah. Like that. Anything that's new to the games is typically something that Canada can feel pretty good about its chances. So it's now 11 medals total for Canada, the 3 gold medals. So 10th right now in the gold rush on our own. Actually, a little better than that in total medals. 9th, if I'm not mistaken, at this moment, because the Dutch have 4 gold medals, but only 8 medals total. Looking to break, and again, people call it a record, but it's a record at non-boycotted Olympics, 24 in Tokyo. So almost halfway home, almost halfway through the games. And frankly, like I'm looking at my list of Canadian medal hopefuls. There are still a lot of events to come. There are still a lot of potential Canadian medals out there. If I had to bet it right now, I do think Canada will exceed the 24 that were won in Tokyo.
Yeah, I think it's looking strong in that regard as well. I think we've got a good shot at it, but need to seal the deal on a couple of these team fronts still down the rest of the way here. So,
and for those wondering, the day after the 2012 London Olympics, remember that was during the time of Road to Excellence and Own the Podium.
Yes.
I don't think you were in with me that day. I think it was Michael Martinengo of all people. But we were digesting the Canadian Olympic performance at the 2012 London Games. It was 18 medals. It was just the 2 gold medals. This after Canada won the gold rush at the Vancouver Games. And it was a disappointing result at large. And I was critical, and in a moment of a heated moment, I said, we won just the 2 gold medals, including one in bouncy castles. And our friend Karen Larson from the CBC was listening and called on in and gave me a right admonishment.
It was pretty mean.
It was pretty mean. That sport. I have not referred to it as such since, other than to tell the story about Karen admonishing me.
Damian Warner in decathlon continues to challenge, by the way. He continues to
and that's defending a gold, of course. Damian Warner was the gold medalist in Tokyo 3 years ago. He's the only decathlete born in the 80s, Blake. He keeps on keeping on in what is a hugely demanding sport, right? Like, think of it. Like, you don't need to master 10 sports. Like, some of them you can just be good enough.
Yeah.
But goodness gracious, think of the training regimen for a decathlete. Everything that they have to go through on a daily, weekly basis to be adept in the different events.
I'm pretty familiar with the day in, day out training of a decathlete. It's not too dissimilar from just a Tuesday in my own life, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're out there throwing javelin, are you?
Well,
Shot
maybe
put.
not with my bum shoulder. I'm going to turn lefty now because I can't do anything with my right. But yeah.
The National Football League season opened Thursday in Canton, Ohio for the Hall of Fame game. And it ended well short of prescribed time. 3 minutes and change left in the third quarter. All sorts of inclement weather there in Canton, and they just decided to call the game right there and then. That's how important preseason games are, folks. So my Bears, with a famous victory over the Houston Texans to kick off the NFL season, or at least the preseason, you will have a Thursday night football game going forward now, right, with the NFL underway. And then there was this, the new kickoff rules. Have you seen the new kickoff rules, Blake?
Yes, many are saying it's the end of the Devin Hester era, if you will.
Yeah, who's going into the Hall of Fame, getting his gold jacket this weekend, the great Bears returner. So, 8 kickoffs last night, 1 touchback. Each team had an illegal formation, a long return of 31 yards. Look, what they've done here, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's not a subtle change. It is a massive overhaul to the kickoff play. You have the kicker way back where the kicker normally kicks off. You have the coverage team way forward from where it is. The ball gets kicked. The coverage team cannot pursue the ball or the returner until the ball is touched, either on the field or by the returner. And then it's a shorter run for the coverage team and the blocking team. Of course, part of that is because the kickoff remained one of the most dangerous plays in the NFL. A lot of injuries because guys are coming downhill at speed over 40, 50 yards and hitting others. So it's one part meant to help the safety of the special teamers who are involved in the kickoff play. It is also designed to try and limit the number of touchbacks and get more returns in the game because, as we know, when a returner breaks free, that's one of the most exciting plays in football. And I will give Roger Goodell and the league office some credit for reimagining this, much like they reimagined the extra point. You can remember Goodell saying at the time, it's not an exciting play. NFL fans don't care for it. We got to change it. The same applies to the kickoff. I do think it is going to take some time for these teams and special teams coaches to really understand and put into practice everything that's now at play, because it's really a revolution of this play.
But early on, like a first go and a 31 yard a long return on the game, like that's not the end of the world. If 31 yards is your longest,
no, it's not. Yeah, I mean, I think was it 1 touchback?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you want to see this play, like again. So it's incredibly exciting. And as a Bears fan, every time Devin Hester touched the ball back in the day, like I held my breath.
And making the coverage team flat-footed, if you will.
Yep.
That's probably a good thing. Like
probably should help. Yeah. Again, I think it's well conceived. I think it's well intentioned, but we'll see where this goes. And it's going to be a big shock to casuals who don't follow the ins and outs of the NFL offseason and the changes that are made. And there will still be onside kicks, but the onside kicks will look like the old kickoffs and effectively will be declared. Right. The surprise onside kick is no more. Folks told you about this earlier in the week. Nation Gear Summer Sale. It's on right now. It's on until Monday, August 6th. 20% off most everything online there at nationgear.ca. And if you spend more than $200, free shipping. Got some Canucks conversation items there. Sekeres and Price Swag is coming later. Get yourself to nationgear.ca for the summer sale. All right, menu time brought to you by our friends at Greta Bar. Greta, great spot to catch the game throughout the season. Quick walk to the rink or stadium. Go-to spot for food, drink, and fun. That arcade, that magnificent arcade. Before, after the game. Make it a game night at Greta 50 West Cordova or at gretabar.com. J-Pat's going to join us here in a moment. Jeff was on vacation last week. Plenty to discuss with Jeff about the Vancouver Canucks. We'll talk about Elias Pettersson, his summer, his next step. We'll talk about Daniel Sprong and whether he fits as one of these Elias Pettersson wingers. We'll talk about Jim Rutherford's comments regarding Thatcher Demko and lessening his workload, and even in between practices or at practice. And we'll talk about Tocchet's pledges to try and loosen the system, create more offensive chances. And as mentioned, the head coach of the BC Lions, Rick Campbell, is going to join us after. And one thing, and I'm going to ask him, they took a knee, Blake, on the final play of the game. You don't often see the losing team take a knee on the final play of the game, right? Like a lot of coaches are like, never surrender. We play the last whistle, if you're losing. I did wonder whether they were going to try and throw the ball downfield, maybe get a pass interference, something like that, to be able to put some points on the board, because there is a world where point differential could matter. But they took a knee. They just went quietly into the night with Dola Gala under center in Winnipeg. So we'll talk to Coach Campbell about everything that went wrong, and most everything went wrong in Winnipeg against the Bombers.
And they've just literally right now released a official statement on Adams, which is exactly what you just talked about. Not long-term, week to week.
Yeah. So you have to think he misses Edmonton, probably Winnipeg as well, but who knows? He's I'm sure he'll be itching to get back out. I heard him talking about how he was at home during the bye week for a couple of days watching the CFL games, and then just was itching to get back to practice and working in advance of this Winnipeg game. Alas, didn't go their way. Didn't start their way, didn't end their way, and there was nothing in the middle. He really could take away from that game for the BC Lions. Okay, let's get to our Bet365 bets of the day. This segment brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Sekeres and Price. I'm going to women's soccer at the Olympics, Blake, and the big quarterfinal tomorrow between Canada and Germany, and we'll talk more about that later in the program. Look, I don't expect things to come easy for the Canadians from this point forward. Not that it has been easy to date. I think it's only going to get more taxing on them. The opponent's going to step up in class. So, as we know, and as everybody says about this team, it is built for tournament football, meaning it's pretty good, keeping the chances down, and it excels at penalties, both converting penalties and stopping penalties, with Sheridan picking up right where Labbé left off in that Canadian net. So it's 2.5 on the total here, Blake. I could see 0-0. I could see 1-1. I'm going under 2.5. That's at plus 115. And I'm going to go extra time, which pays at plus 250.
I'm going soccer as well, but of the Whitecaps variety, they're pretty big favorites right now against Tijuana at home, plus 110 for the victory. So not tantalizing enough for me. I'll go to Brian White, who missed a sitter, I thought, versus LAFC. Usually scores at home, usually likes to get on the board early. So I'm going to go Brian White as a first goal scorer, paying out a plus 450 for the Whitecaps.
Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. You can use code VANBONUS when opening that account. Jeff Paterson coming up next. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. No show Monday because of the holiday. We'll talk to you Wednesday.
In a season like this, you never want to miss a single second of what's happening on the ice, and you want to be around your fellow fans, right? Well, Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova, the perfect spot to do so. Hey, if you've got tickets, a great place to pre and post. They've got drink specials every single day. And if you don't have tickets, well, stick around and soak up the atmosphere with all your fellow fans, play all the great video games and air hockey, great air hockey set up as well at Greta Bar YVR. We'll see you there, 50 West Cordova.
Mr. Jeff Paterson. Missed you. How you doing?
It was only 1 week, but I'm glad to be missed. I'm doing well, and back at it.
Mm-hmm. And you'll be in for me next week, so thank you for that
Right.
in advance. We'll start with our poll. TSN Hockey yesterday asked our buddy Frank Corrado. Elias Pettersson is being paid like one now. Do you think he can be a top 5 player in the National Hockey League someday, Jeff? Particularly given the competition within that top 5 and the names in that list.
I'm going to say yes, because I think he was tracking that way in his 102-point season. So I think we've seen it from him. And now the question is, can we see it again? And that is a $11.6 million question, obviously, when it comes to Elias Pettersson. And I've got some concerns, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he has shown just the levels that it takes to be a legitimate superstar in the National Hockey League. And hard to bet against a 25-year-old guy that got to 102 points as early as he did in his career. So it's there. It's in there. It's just a matter of it coming back again.
Let me ask, what would be the route to being a top 5 player? Because as we know, he's not the fleetest of foot. And while his skating may improve from here, I don't think anybody is going to confuse him one day with a burner. He's a slight guy, and I think the strength will improve as well. But I don't think anyone is going to confuse him with one of these burly power forwards going forward. So is it being an elite, complete offensive player, goal scoring, and playmaker, as well as being a Selke Trophy finalist or Selke Trophy winner? Is that the sort of pathway you see, Jeff, to him being at his optimal and being considered a top 5 guy?
Yeah, he's never going to be in the conversation with Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon in terms of outright speed and just beating guys with blinding wheels. It is that complete game. It's using his biggest weapon, which is his brain, and outthinking players and being a step ahead, and taking page out of the way Daniel and Henrik went about being among the best players in the National Hockey League as well. So I think maybe he's blessed with even better raw individual skills than Daniel and Henrik, but they were just so much further ahead on the curve of any opponent and thinking 3 steps ahead of everybody else. I think Pettersson's got some of that in him, but I do think with a shot, I mean, we've seen he's got an elite level shot when he gets it away and when his wrist is 100% healthy and able to withstand the workload. So again, I want to see it, and I am fascinated to see what he's done this offseason, what the pressures of this new contract do, because I do think that can weigh on a guy. He has to start earning those dollars. He's getting paid. He's got to play like one of the top paid players in the National Hockey League. And so, look, they don't need him until opening night of the regular season, but wouldn't it be something if he showed up back in Vancouver and the first day of training camp set the tone, was clearly one of the best players on the ice, if they do bag skates or any kind of fitness testing, that he's leading the way, and then carry that through the preseason so that when the regular season arrives, he's erased some of the doubt, probably not all of the doubt in the mind of Canucks fans, but it would be something to me. And I think, look, the team's committed to him. I would love to see him return that commitment by showing up and on the first day of training camp, just looking like that star level Elias Pettersson.
Amen, Jeff. Amen.
Well,
and
he had the weight of the contract that affected him this year. I mean, if he lets the weight of the contract that's now signed affect him as well, boy, I mean, you're taking it from both sides there. That's not a great comportment for a star player where multiple different contract pressures are affecting him. It's one thing if he was stressed about getting the contract. Well, he's got it. To me, that should be pressure off. I mean, if he's crumbling under the pressure of performing up to this contract, I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well, I think there was a huge swath of the fan base, though, that was like, hey, wait a sec, he's not an $11.6 million player guy yet. The pressure that's going to come once he puts pen to paper. Well, he put pen to paper starting on July 1st. He got the big signing bonus, the first check of this new contract. Now, I think some of those people that were on the fence in terms of really applying pressure on Elias Pettersson, now there's nowhere for him to hide. He is collecting those paychecks now. He is one of the highest paid players in the National Hockey League. He's certainly the top paid player on the Vancouver Canucks until Quinn Hughes gets his new extension in a couple of seasons. And that comes with different kinds of pressures. So there was pressure to get the contract, but I also think now there's this new pressure of living up to the contract. And we know he's a new age athlete. He's a sensitive guy, and some things do get to him. Can he compartmentalize and put that aside so that when the puck drops, he's able just to focus on doing what he does and does extremely well, and that's being a really, really good hockey player.
Well, before we leave Elias, Jeff, I'd love your interpretation of what we heard from Jim Rutherford, but mostly Rick Tocchet last week. I mean, Rutherford basically said, look, he learned some tough lessons in the playoffs, but Tocchet allowed that they have dispatched their strength coach to Sweden. He wants him to come into his office and share ideas and ask for different things. But mostly, this is the one that perked my ears up, that Rick is still building the relationship and the trust some 18 months after taking over as head coach of the Canucks. What was your interpretation of all that we heard from Canucks brass with regards to Elias last week?
Yeah, I guess without having an actual flow chart of who knocks on Rick Tocchet's door the most, but it's certainly, we hear from the coach how this door is open and guys are coming in there and guys are floating ideas. It sounded to me like maybe Elias Pettersson isn't one of those guys, at least not on the regular yet. But if Tocchet and Pettersson are going to both be here for the long term and this team is going to achieve its goals, they're going to have to get into lockstep. There's going to have to be that comfort level where the player can go to the coach and the coach can go to the player. And, Tocchet delivered some messages through the media last year. We know that things get blown maybe out of proportion at times in a market like this one, but Tocchet has to have the freedom to criticize his best players if they're not playing well. And we all know that Elias Pettersson, after the All-Star break and through the playoffs, wasn't anywhere close to being the best player that he can be. So I certainly hope that they've got this line of communication open and that it's a two-way street. I think the other thing, too, for me is, and Tocchet made this assertion earlier in the summer, basically throwing the gauntlet down that he wanted Pettersson to come to camp as one of the top 3 conditioned athletes on this hockey club, which suggests that he hasn't been in that stratosphere to this stage in his career. So I think it's great. Look, if the organization is willing to buy a business class ticket to Stockholm and put the strength and training guy there on the ground with Elias Pettersson, you've invested in this player so heavily. Why wouldn't you do everything in your power as an organization to bring out the best in this guy? So I like that. I think that's a proactive step by the Vancouver Canucks. I'd love to know, and Petey's a pretty quiet guy, keeps to himself. We know that about him. But I'm really excited and intrigued to find out about his summer. I don't know how much he's going to be willing to share with us, but it does feel like a massive summer on so many levels as he gets set to enter the new contract to try to help this team take that next step now. How much of the sluggish performance down the stretch into the playoffs did he take to heart? How much was the knee truly an issue? And ultimately, what's he done over these summer months so that he can arrive back on the Canucks doorstep ready to be the best version of himself?
I don't know if you heard us chat with Frank Corrado about Daniel Sprong, whom he's played with, but he gave a tale of a guy who's changed quite a bit, and the fact that he's a very skilled player that is capable of helping. Can he help Elias Pettersson, do you think?
On the surface, I think, wow, to get a guy 3 weeks into free agency that basically was just sitting there and to get him off the scrap heap, at least by NHL contract standards, and think that he can be the answer for a $12 million player, it's wild. But at the same time, this guy scores goals. He does. He's such a curious character. And as much as goal scorers gets paid around the National Hockey League, and this guy has produced, but he hasn't been able to get that big ticket yet. And clearly there are some flaws in his game. And I love the questions that Rick Tocchet posed to him about why don't you play late in games? Have you ever asked yourself that? And also, why haven't you been able to stick in one spot? And so I do think that Sprong is getting to a point in his career. I mean, unless he's that outlier guy who is content to move around year after year after year. And, it seems most guys want the comfort of and security of a little bit of term on their contract as well, but he can score. And you look at, 21 goals in Seattle a couple of years ago on a team that overcame the odds and was a playoff team, and he was a part of that. And last year, a middling Detroit team, but he still scored 18 goals, played primarily with Joe Veleno and Robbie Fabry, who are National Hockey Leaguers, but they're not Elias Pettersson. So what can the benefit for Sprong be if he gets a chance to play with Pettersson? And like Pettersson showed a couple of years ago, he took an unheralded guy in Andrei Kuzmenko, a right shot player with a knack to score goals, made him a 39 goal scorer in the National Hockey League. I'm not predicting a repeat of that, but if the best version of Pettersson comes back, and these guys find some chemistry. Yeah, I mean, for under $1 million, like the potential is there for the Sprong signing to work out really well, both for the hockey club, but for Sprong himself.
I think I know the answer to this, but where do you think he should start, Jeff?
I suppose I'm ready to see him get an opportunity with Pettersson and DeBrusk right off the top, and that's either your first or your second line. But I do go back to this idea that Pia Suter was a free agent until this time last year, into August, and ended up being a top 6 winger for the Vancouver Canucks. I know he was signed as a center, but ultimately he played in their top 6. I mean, this would be 2 years in a row that the Canucks would take a guy off the unrestricted scrap heap and move him into the top 6, which is pretty unconventional. But hey, it's about building the puzzle pieces, as Rick Tocchet always says. So, yeah, like, they've got Höglander.
I thought I saw you tweet about fourth line, Jeff, that you thought maybe the fourth line and work his way up.
Initially, when they signed him, I kind of thought of him as a fourth line guy. But as I sit here and think, I mean, Nils Höglander, for all of his success last year, was still a healthy scratch in the playoffs. Like, he still hasn't earned the trust of a third NHL head coach, right? He started under Travis Green and then Bruce Boudreau. And some of those same questions, even in a 24-goal season, still arose around Nils Höglander. So they've got this surplus of wingers now, right? By my count, they've got 11 wingers for 8 spots on opening night. We'll see what happens. We'll see if they're still all on the roster by the time the season starts. The injuries can happen. I think one thing that we all have to take into account, guys, is that the Canucks' depth is likely to be tested more this coming season than it was last year. Their top 7 scorers from last year missed a total of 5 games. Yeah. And 2 of those were Höglander as a healthy scratch. And I think the other 3 were game 82 in Winnipeg when they left Besser behind and a couple other guys. So that's not likely to happen, right? It's contact sport, injuries. You can't plan on injuries. But to get your top 7 scorers missing a grand combined total of 5 games, and so they're going to need a little bit more depth, I think, at times this year. And so to sit here in the middle of the summer and have 11 guys that you can name check that could all play the wing position or did play for the Vancouver Canucks last season, it's going to make some fascinating battles come training camp time.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that, all these guys make a modest sum outside of Besser and DeBrusk. So even the 11th guy of the 11 wingers you're talking about is going to feel like there's upward mobility as long as he shows it. If you're Vasily Podkolzin, you're making way more money than Daniel Sprong is. But of course, you're not going to get any elevation in the lineup unless you show them that there's reason to be elevated. So to me, it's going to be a battle royale in training camp because people will still have that dangling carrot. If they sign a $4 million middling winger instead of Daniel Sprong, well, other guys are going to feel like they're roadblock because the chances that $4 million winger ending up on the fourth line is pretty slim. But all these guys are deletable to the AHL if they need be.
Yeah, so there's that as an option, obviously, and then. A guy like Höglander, it just, it's a contract year for him. Again, 24 goals. He showed that he can be productive lower in the lineup as much as he earned the promotion. If he has to start lower in the lineup, like, I hope he doesn't sulk over that. I hope he looks at it and says, hey, I had a ton of success in the first half of last season, lower in the lineup. I'm going to have to do that again. And I do hope that Vasily Podkolzin watched a lot of Höglander last year and can take a page from his book. We know now no longer waiver eligible, so it's now or never for Podkolzin. And then you get to guys like Phil DiGiuseppe and Nils Aman, who, with all due respect, are fairly expendable, I think, at the NHL level for the Vancouver Canucks. If they're going to progress and they're going to get better, it may mean moving past guys like DiGiuseppe and Nils Aman, who, as you said, can be buried in the minors, and maybe that's where they're going to have to spend some of their time this coming season.
Yeah, no, I think so. Podkolzin requiring waivers, I think you absolutely need to protect the asset there. But as we've all talked about, huge year for Vasily Podkolzin. If he's not showing the signs this year, then perhaps you have to move on there. Rutherford's comments on Demko, Jeff, and how he has to change up sort of the way he trains, the way he practices between starts. What did you make of those?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that coming from the top. I think the organization is really going to have to show some discipline here. It's not about having Thatcher Demko available to them in November or February. At this stage of his career, of their evolution, it's about having this guy healthy and ready to get on a long playoff run for the first time in his NHL career. And I know he was healthy for the first game of the playoffs, and that's the last time we saw him in a Canuck uniform. So I do hope that they can come up with a plan between Rick Tocchet and Ian Clark and whoever else is involved and stick to the plan. And if it is a maximum of 55 starts, don't fight that. Don't feel like there's this importance to replicate the start of last year, and the best path to doing that is to riding their number one guy in goal a whole bunch early on. They need to find out if Artur Silovs can perform over the long haul here. They've got to get him some starts, continue to develop him. And I think, too, another thing, guys, that when I talk about organizational discipline, there's not a person on this planet that thinks the Edmonton Oilers are going to face plant out of the gate the way they did last year, right? They learned a hard lesson. It cost a coach's job. They're going to be better. And I think they got better here in free agency. So is it about keeping up with the Edmonton Oilers right off the bat? If you're the Vancouver Canucks, it's about being the best version of yourself. And I don't think they can fall into this trap that if the Oilers get a 6-point lead on them, that they got to make up that gap in October and November. And again, the best way to do that is to just run Thatcher Demko out there every single night. So there are a plan for his game usage, but also, and Rutherford mentioned the practice goaltender. Look, I was at most of the practice last year. They've got this practice goalie. That's great. But there were a lot of days where he was just a spectator or a bystander at practice. He was on the ice, but they weren't using him. Thatcher Demko does not need to face 2-on-0s and 3-on-0s repeatedly in practice. He's past that. Find the best possible practice plan for him with Ian Clark, get their work in, but give him some days off to rest and recover so that he can be ready for those 50 or 55 starts and deliver, and then be fully healthy when the playoffs roll around.
I almost felt like that was Tocchet's, excuse to Rutherford. Well, no, we had a practice goalie.
Yeah, he stood and watched an awful lot.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Blake, you were going to say.
I was just saying, goalies love to practice. It's ingrained in them from a young age when they actually do need to practice. And yet at this point, it's about being healthy.
Well, and I think, too, this is going to be a tough sell for Thatcher Demko. Look, he's 2 years out from contract. They can start talking extension a year from now. Wouldn't he love a Vezina trophy in his back pocket as he goes into contract negotiations? He can still, he showed he was a runner-up when he played 54 games this year, but that was with the injury that took him out for that final stretch. He was on pace for 60 starts again. They've got to guard against that. And I think Thatcher has to understand the Vezina would be great. Stanley Cup would be a whole lot better. And individual awards, as much as they're great and they help in contract negotiations, this team, where it is with its window, it's all about building off last year and trying to find ways to take steps forward.
Back-to-back years with nominations on his resume is going to do a lot for his contract too. The trophy is nice, but if you're in the top 3 in back-to-back years, I think he's going to do just fine.
Yeah. All right. Enough talk about practice. Let's move on here. Coach Tocchet, Jeff, says he's going to change some systems, things that he's going to loosen the reins, give the best skill players more offensive creativity, that they aren't going to be as slavish to dump and chase, that they aren't going to be as slavish to possess the puck and make sure you get a quality shot as a defensive tactic to not give up possession in the offensive zone. I'm sure you saw what he said to Thomas Drance on The Athletic. What do you think? You think Tocchet is going to execute 2.0 here, or do you think they are going to run back home to mama and the safety valve of the way they played this past year? Because it really did baseline and underpin their success. What do you make of what the coach is saying with regards to changes to the system and the structure?
I want to believe him, but I'm going to need to see it for myself. He instilled a structure and a system that worked defensively, and I just don't see them getting away from that. So if there are ways to loosen the reins a little bit offensively, I'm all for it. But you saw in game 6 and 7 that they felt that they could win 1-0. And then the Oilers got goals, and all of a sudden the plan changes, and scoring 2 goals became a real challenge for them in those last couple of games of that second round. So they think that they're a better skilled team. Again, hopefully they get an Elias Pettersson that's a lot closer to the top of his game, and that'll help. That Jake DeBrusk maybe finishes a few of the chances that Ilya Mikheyev couldn't. So I think there are some paths here, but I'm not expecting a completely changed Rick Tocchet to come back behind the bench. Let me say, feather in his cap to be named to the Four Nations face-off coaching staff, and I think he'll be a terrific assistant coach. We know how passionate he is as a head coach, and you take the head coaching responsibilities away. Like, I think he'll be the ultimate rah-rah guy. Reigning coach of the year, did the job that he did. So, he's earned the spot. And I think it's important too, guys, to note that it's a short form tournament. Canada certainly has every reason to believe that it can have success in this thing. If Canada does, I would think they run back the same coaching staff for the Olympics the following year. So Rick Tocchet probably has 1 foot behind the bench of the Olympic team right now, as long as things don't go completely sideways for Canada. So a couple of big years coming up for him and for this hockey club. But in terms of them looking, starkly different than they did last year, I'm going to have to see it before I truly believe it.
Well, a couple of big shows coming up next week with J-Pat and Blake. Jeff, thank you for this. Welcome back. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, enjoy the long weekend, guys.
The Vancouver Canadians are back at the net. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com.
Coach, thoughts on the game?
Yeah, bad day at the office. We never could get on track offensively. I was actually just watching the film again this morning, and the score's 3-0, and it's almost halftime. So the game's there for the taking, but we had 2 first downs, and you can't win playing that way. So our body of work suggests we're a good team, and we got a lot of good players and good coaches. But there's no question that yesterday we got our butts beat, and we'll have to learn from it and move on.
100 yards net offense, 102, 4 first downs on the game. I know Vernon gets hurt here, Coach, but explain it to us. Like, how can an offense that looks so great, almost scoring at will earlier in the season, be so punchless last night?
We never got on track. I did not see that coming. And like I said, I'm going to chalk it up to a bad day at the office, because I think the body of work is good, and I think we're a good team. But there's no question that we never got going, never made plays, and that's all I can chalk it up to. There's nothing else to it. They had a good game plan. Credit them, good game plan, all that. But we gotta make some plays and get back in the game.
What was the reaction in the room after that game? I mean, anger, shell shock?
Yeah. There's I think we're growing up, though. I think last year, the year before, you might have had some, I don't know what you'd call it, the temper tantrum thing, or that whole frustration coming out. But I did not see that yesterday, and that doesn't mean that they didn't care. I just mean I think they want to get back to work, which is a good sign. We're going to watch this with them here this morning, so I liked that the attitude of let's get back to work and try to fix this so this doesn't happen again.
The offense is flying so high. Is there a risk of having like too much fun on offense where you just assume it's just going to happen? Is there any part of that?
Yeah, I don't sense that. Our guys have a pretty good work ethic, and they had a good week of practice. That's why I didn't see it coming. It wasn't like we had a bad week or this thing seemed off or things like that. I thought they had a good week of practice. They were working hard, doing what they should be doing, and we just weren't seeing it last night. We could never get in any type of flow.
Rick, let me just ask you, and look, you've forgotten more about football than many of us will ever know, but they were wondering on the broadcast last night about why move Justin McInnis after all the success he has had to accommodate Hatcher. And then I'll ask you about the 3 Canadian interior linemen as well, which was not a successful formula for you in week 1. Why those personnel moves, and do you think that had any contribution to the offense?
I don't think so. We'll certainly look at it. That was our plan from the get-go. Hatcher's playing in the spot he normally did. We think McInnis' spot, it's more of a field slot position. We think it's tailor-made for his body type and his skill set. But we'll make sure that that's the right thing. And our offensive line, we were not. A lot of the sacks were coverage issues of holding on to the ball and not getting the ball out. So we're really high on Tyler Packer, and Couture. We brought back because he's healthy again. And we don't think that was the issue last night after watching it, but we're always going to be open-minded and making sure we play the right people in the right spots.
Okay, on to the quarterback and Vernon. What's his injury status? What's his health status?
I'm sticking to my story right now in that he's been looked at. It seems more like in the weeks, not months, but he does need to get a couple more tests done. So far, so good as far as that it's not a season-ending thing or a devastating thing as far as knees go. But he does need to get a couple more tests done. But so far, so good. In that, like I said, it's something more along a line of weeks. But I think we're gonna have a better idea this afternoon after he gets a couple more tests done.
Does this mean the running game gets a bit of a spotlight with VA out?
Yeah, I mean, we always want to be able to run the ball. William Stanback's a good football player. We got to get the ball in his hands and be productive. That was a big thing last night. Is we were not productive on first down. And then we're in second and long, and they're dropping 9 people into coverage, and that's not the world. That's not the world that we thrive in.
How do you feel about your quarterbacks then, Coach? Is Dolagala your guy going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. That's why we signed the guy. He's got experience, and he's played and won games, and I think I like him. Chase Bryce too is another guy that. Man, has he looked different than he did the year before, just as far as his attitude and those type of things. So we always talk about in the offseason, we always talk about you got to have at least 2 quarterbacks because it's rare that you go through a season playing only one guy. And that's very likely going to be put to the test. And we'll confirm that once we know what VA's status is 100%.
Ask you to put your co-general manager hat on, Rick, but have you been in contact with Nathan Rourke? Is there any world where Nathan Rourke is wearing a BC Lions uniform?
He just signed with the Atlanta Falcons, so he's doing the NFL thing. So I think that's news is out there now, but he has signed with Atlanta. He's doing his NFL journey. It was great to see him a couple weeks ago. We talked to him a couple weeks ago, and that's for now. He's doing the NFL thing. And I tell you what, I sure like VA. He had an off. He'll be the first one to tell you he had a bad day yesterday. But if you look at what that guy's done for us this year, we're lucky to have him, and looking forward to when he's back.
This is a case of you guys probably happy that adversity is happening in game 8 of the season rather than a little bit later. It's a long season. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I mean, You've got 10 games left in this season. And you've actually got to work for it now too. At 5-3, you're not home and cooled, are you?
No, it's a long season, and there's a lot of football ahead of us, and we have a lot of people in this building doing the right things. And we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to look for ways to put our players in better spots, and we need our players to make plays. And I like to think as I've gotten older, I've been better at judging things on a whole body of work, not judging people on a bad moment or a bad day. And the body of work suggests to me that we're a good team. We've got a lot of work to do to get better, but there's lots of reasons to believe that we can win football games.
Sometimes at the end of games like that, where you're giving new guys maybe a look just because the game is out of hand. Was anybody the Phoenix rising out of the ashes there? Did anybody earn themselves more minutes next time out?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll look at that. We have another long week coming up, so time is on our side. We don't play till next Sunday, so we have a couple days here to look at all those things. And like I said, we need to be smart enough to be open-minded about, like I said, whether that's tweaking things on playing someone different or putting them in a better spot, all those things. But we played a lot yesterday with 5 Canadians on defense, sometimes 6, and that's a good sign, and that we have that much depth and that much flexibility. So I'm still very hopeful. It was definitely a rough day yesterday, and a long plane ride home. But the sun has a way of coming up the next day, and you got to keep going.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Coach, about the schedule, because many thought, hey, what a perfect time for a bye week later, especially after all the short weeks. I know you're disappointed in the loss in Calgary and sort of challenged guys to, let that motivate them through their bye week. How effective do you think your players used that bye week?
I mean, I hope they did. They were a lot of the guys stayed in town and were in here getting treatment and treating their bodies the right way. And it actually was a very short bye week from the standpoint we played Sunday and then Thursday. So we're playing Thursday, Sunday. It's only 1 day shorter than the bye week. So right. kind of a strange schedule, but it's all good. We have 2 weeks where, like I said, time's on our side of trying to get guys as healthy as possible. And we got to go. We got to move on and go beat Edmonton is what we need to do.
Does it hurt anymore, Rick, because it was Winnipeg and that's your derby? That's the mountain you're trying to climb. Do you read anything into it that it was in fact the Bombers, the team that you've had the struggles with in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean we played there 5 times in the last 2 years. We played there 3 times last year, and we played them twice this year, and we beat them. We beat them once again there, and so we have an opportunity in 2 weeks to beat them and win the season series. So there's lots of reasons for optimism and to want to play well. And with big games coming up, like I said, we got to beat Edmonton's our next game, and then after that it's Winnipeg, and the beat goes on.
Don't see a lot of shutouts in the CFL, Coach. I think the last time for the Lions was 3 years ago. You took a knee. Was that intentional? Was that a coaching thing? Was that a let them sit there and look at that 0 for the next week?
No. That's me not getting William Stanback hurt. If William Stanback gets hurt on the last play of the game, that's stupid. Okay. And that the knee is nothing other than live to play another day and not be hard-headed, and onward we go.
Well, look forward to the game in Edmonton. Thank you for the time, Coach. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.